Over the past few years, we've been seeing more and more people moving south, and for very good reasons. Relatively speaking, Georgia doesn't have much of a coastline other than Savannah, so unless you're looking there, your choices for a coastal and tropical climate on the eastern coast are South Carolina and Florida. But these states are very different, so let's look at the differences. Hi, I'm Sue LeFavi with Ballinger Realty, and if you have any questions along the way, just call, text, or email me. When comparing South Carolina and Florida, I'm going to evaluate the cost of living, weather, quality of life, and cuisine. First, let's look at the cost of living comparisons. The data I'm going to show you comes from a website called bestplaces.net, a well-respected source that acquires their data from the Census Bureau and their chief data product called the American Community Survey, which is updated every year. They use a base of 100 points to reflect an average for the United States. So numbers you see greater than 100 mean you're paying more than the average. Numbers under 100 mean you are paying less than the average in the US. You can see the overall cost of living is considerably less in South Carolina at 89.3 versus 103.1 in Florida. And looking at what I consider the key elements, healthcare cost is just about the same, but housing is significantly different. South Carolina is approximately 25% less than Florida. But let's drill down deeper and look at a few different comparisons by city. I used to live in Boca Raton, Florida, so I'm going to compare that to where I live now in Beaufort, South Carolina. Both are coastal cities. Looking at the two indicators, healthcare in Beaufort is a few points higher, meaning a bit more expensive than Boca. However, with housing, you can see a huge difference, Boca being a whopping 55% higher. Now looking at two popular and growing inland cities. I'm highlighting Greenville, South Carolina, and my old alma mater, Gainesville, Florida. Interestingly, the healthcare costs are approximately 10% higher in Gainesville. The housing is very comparable, both about 20% less than the national average. Another factor in your housing cost is what you pay in property taxes. This can make a big difference in affordability of a home. Both states do have homestead exemption for primary residents. But looking at my chart, you can see South Carolina ranks number 6 in the country for the lowest property taxes. Florida comes in at number 24 and is approximately 65% more expensive than South Carolina. Now on to the weather. South Carolina summers are just as hot and humid as Florida. And ladies, you can put your hair straighteners away. But what you do get in South Carolina is a bit of the 4 seasons. You really notice this in the northern areas like Spartanburg, which is home to the Blue Ridge Mountains. It does get a bit chilly in the lower or coastal South Carolina, but only for a few months, which is just enough for most folks to take a break from the heat. And yes, it does snow here, but only on rare occasions. A very common question I get often is, what about the hurricanes? This chart documents hurricanes and their force category, 5 meaning the worst. You can see overall South Carolina has had about 1/4 the number of hurricanes than Florida in the past 70 years. And looking at a Category 3 hurricane, which can do extensive damage, Florida has had 24 versus 2 in South Carolina. This brings me to homeowners insurance. You can be absolutely sure you are going to pay more for homeowners and flood insurance if required in the state of Florida because of the greater potential for hurricanes and flooding. I found this chart rating average home insurance premium rates in the US, and no surprise, Florida is on the top. South Carolina didn't even make the top 12. And just to give you an idea, my brother lives down on the eastern coast in South Florida, and he's had the same insurance provider for over 20 years that all of a sudden up and left the state of Florida because of all the claims that were being filed in the state. He had a very difficult time trying to find new coverage, yet he had never filed a single claim in that 20-year period. Besides all the data points and all these financial factors, another element that is just important to consider is what does it feel like to live there and the quality of life. South Carolina has a southern charm feel no matter where you are in the state. On the other hand, Florida is a southern state, but you don't see much of this. Hospitality, yes, there is definitely a noticeable difference. I lived in South Florida for about 20 years. Most folks were transplants, me included. And when I moved to South Carolina, there was no doubt the Southern hospitality was the real deal here. People are generally very friendly everywhere you go. Just walking down the street, if you don't nod and smile to a passerby, they just might think you're rude. On the other hand, I almost immediately noticed, moving to South Carolina, that it's a more laid back with a slower paced lifestyle. Even the natives talk slower. You do see some of this in Florida, but it's primarily down in the Florida Keys where you're on island time all year. Here in South Carolina, a hobby I call porching is a favorite. That's where you grab your glass of wine or sweet tea and sit on your front porch and chat with the neighbors as they go by. I've never experienced porching in Florida. I felt like I grew up in the fast lane. Okay, on to cuisine. South Carolina is all about the traditional Southern cuisine. We love our shrimp and grits, collard greens, fried green tomatoes, and some great barbecue. And just to add, the international influence is growing in South Carolina, especially in the larger cities. In Florida, there's really no one cuisine that dominates the menu. Sure, seafood is very popular because of the ocean, but you also see a lot of Latin influence with Cuban food, some great Italian dishes, Middle Eastern, Venezuelan, Argentinian, and some European influence. So you have a big mix of flavors in Florida. The last thing I want to mention, tying in both quality of life and cuisine, is that outdoor living is a huge part of South Carolina life, pretty much all year round except the few brutal hot summer months. There are always many opportunities to socialize with people around food. In the winter months, low country boils and oyster roasts are very popular, and I do my best to attend every one I get invited to. You cannot beat standing around a fire on a chilly afternoon, shucking oysters, mingling with old friends and new friends while listening to a local musician playing some tunes. Now that's my idea of a fun time. Other times of the year, during shrimp or crab season, you'll see outdoor festivals centered around the seafood of the season. Summing it up, the data does show that financially, South Carolina is a better choice, but there are certainly other factors to consider. It's all a matter of preference. I shared my experiences living in both places, and I feel South Carolina, in particular, the low country lifestyle, is a unique way of living with a culture and cuisine that's just right for me and my husband. If you have any questions about living in Florida versus South Carolina, please reach out to me anytime. Thanks.